My name is Samuel Mugo. I'm a professor in McEwan University where I teach analytical chemistry. In the next 15 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about the widening rift in higher education and what I think, should be strategic alignment of what we can do in chemical education so that it can be most relevant in the 21st century. Now, it is well known that higher education is legitimized in our societies as a primary site for knowledge production, where we produced skilled human capital, what we call the highly qualified personnel or the HQP, who are very useful for economic development. Now, university education has widely been accepted as a key index of any country's economic output. In fact, higher education equally has been regarded as a gateway, of individual socio-economic status growth, where in the past, you had high educated individuals, getting actually jobs when they are still in universities by being scouted, by different companies. Now, over time, with the diversified funding model by the government, which is a core stakeholder really in higher education, we've seen the rise of graduates or people with a degree or undergraduate degree rise from 25% in the 1950s to 60% in 2020 in developed countries such as Canada. Now, the present is a little bit different, than the past, where we are facing headwinds in higher education. Some of the issues are related to globalization, innovation, as well as what is being referred to as the fourth industrial revolution, which has really radically shifted the world of work, especially in the disciplinary traditions such as chemistry, which is fairly linked, to manufacturing. And we all know, with Industry 4.0, with issues with robotics and so on, the nature of work, has shifted radically. Indeed, according to the University of Washington report in 2021, the underemployment rate of graduates for their first job is around 53%. So you're talking about, lots of people who are not happy really with where they are, despite having invested, in higher education. And so the situation, is that of thinking ahead, of what should we do, to face the headwinds that we are facing presently. Now, again, some of the headwinds, as I mentioned, are related to globalization. And so, in fact, there's a debate, an ongoing debate, really, in Canada and other developed countries, what we call the global north. Are we facing what we are calling deindustrialization and manufacturing decline, which has been recorded actually, for a significant period of time, especially from the 1976, until presently, we've seen a radical decline, in manufacturing, and with it, of course, manufacturing jobs. And even a little bit more worrisome is the decline, in productivity, which is the measure, of the value that each employee adds, to the industry. And so there's been that decline, and of course, that has been fairly worrisome. Now, with that decline, there's been an incline or growth of actually industrialization or growth of manufacturing, especially, in the global south, which are the emerging countries, such as China and so on. And there are many reasons, that go with that, be it the increase or democratization of the technical know-how, be it the adaptability or creativity of individuals, especially, in the global south. And of course, the obviousness, the fact that, the labor market there and the cost of it, is a lot lower, than the global north. And for that reason, they tend to be a lot more competitive. In fact, thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic, we found maybe the scary side of it, that even things like the personal protective clothing and equipment and so on actually were coming, from our being imported, particularly in Canada. And of course, there's been a debate, is it time to reconsider actually, the impacts of the decline of manufacturing, in the developed countries, such as Canada. And so the higher education, has been in close focus then, by different stakeholders on what can we do better, in terms of rethinking the challenges that we face in knowledge translation. And when I talk about knowledge translation, I'm referring to not only the HQP that I've talked about, but also the products and services and technologies, that we can produce here, in the developed countries. How can we rekindle again, the manufacturing and the knowledge translation in terms of developing human capital that is aligned, to thrive, with these, tectonic shifts related to the industry 4.0. And so government, the key stakeholder, that funds most of the grants, that go into the universities, they are demanding, constructive alignment, so that we actually produce creative learners, who are skilled, to contribute, to the economic reinvention that is needed in the developed countries, with a focus especially, on student employability. And of course, the push is not only from the government, but also, from the students that we trained. They want to see that they are actually getting jobs, in meaningful jobs that align to what they've been trained to do. So the situation is very similar, like I've tried to illustrate here. Are we lagging behind, from the global south, who tends to be a lot more agile, compared, to the global north. In fact, in Alberta government 2030 plan on building skills for jobs initiative, they are pushing on what they are calling an outcome-based model, where they fund universities or post-secondary, education, based on the output, which is particularly related, to employability. So universities are supposed to show that the HQP that we are training, is gaining meaningful employment out there. And this one is not just a reserve, or particularly unique to Alberta. I think, it's an issue across Canada, but also, a global phenomenon. If you look at countries, like Hong Kong, in 2012, they actually implemented something similar, what they are calling the student-centered and outcome-based learning. So it's not something that's very unique, to our country at all. So very quickly situating or focusing the ideas, that we are talking about to chemistry, I strongly believe, there is need for us to rebrand, chemistry, so that it align, with the future of where we should be going. Look at the present in the chemical industry, which is largely now considered mature and sort of doesn't create a lot of excitement. But nonetheless, the chemical industry, is very significant in terms of economic impact, in terms of, it contributes close to $6 trillion, to the global GDP, with an estimated of about 100 million jobs indirectly connected, to the chemical industry, with about 20 million of those jobs actually directly connected to the chemical industry. It's a big industry. But the slight concern is the fact that it's considered mature, and actually we're seeing a significant decline over the years, particularly, like I've said, in the global north, where most of the manufacturing in the chemical industry, of course, has shifted to the emerging countries, particularly China. And so we need to reimagine the future of chemistry, particularly, to demonstrate that it's not as mature as we think. And there are lots of new types of chemistries, that can be very insightful, especially, the sustainable high functional materials that are being used to create things like the energy devices or the Internet of Things that are totally revolutionizing the precision, agriculture, medicine, and environment, and so on. And as we can see, that is really the chemistry of the future that is still yet to be fully developed. Also, it's very important, for us to rebrand the chemical education so that it's very closely aligned, to solve the challenges of the 21st century, that have been highlighted by the United Nations Social Development Goals, the 17 development goals, which very closely actually, can be solved, by chemical education, especially because most of them actually align to the sustainability issue, which is what I think, chemistry or the future of chemistry can be. And so we need to envision the chemistry curriculum, so that we incorporate, what people call the circular economy, particularly thinking about recyclability, of molecules, or other materials, but we think of it completely at a molecular level. And especially thinking about, the functionality of the materials out there and building them, carefully so that we have very high functional materials that are well thought out, at a molecular level. So the challenge of our day really, is to educate chemical educators, or rather the challenge of chemical educators is to create chemistry knowledge, that is translatable, not only in terms of training the HQP, with skill sets that are needed and that align, with the UN SDGs in terms of people who can solve those problems, but also, creating products and services, that are sustainable and that align, in solving the challenges, of the UN SDGs, that promise really to create a more equitable, healthy, an environment that is equitable really for all. Now, the one bigger problem, that we actually face and that has been identified as a problem, particularly in the developed countries, is what we are calling the misalignment in terms of the skills gap of the HQP, that we train. Now, there's a lot of, debate out there, and there's consensus, that most of the HQP, sometimes they do not have the skills that are totally really needed, particularly, to fit in the industries, of present. And the skill sets that are needed, by the industries, what they call the professional skills, include things like, problem solving, particularly, again, aligned, to the problems of the day, the United Nations SDGs. Things like, organization, time management, independent learning, things like numeracy, information technology or IT skills and so on, and then business awareness. Those are some of, the professional skills, that are being demanded, by the current, industries. And there's consensus that, there's a skills gap in terms of the HQP that we are training, is not well adept or is not well skilled, or they do not have those skills, when they are coming from the universities. And so one solution, that has been proposed there, is to rethink our pedagogical training so that we incorporate a curriculum, that embeds, these types of professional skills. And that's what people are calling the work-integrated learning, or what is sometimes called the work-based learning. And the purpose of it really is to link the academic theory, to the skills that are really needed, in practice or in the industry. However, unfortunately, there's a lack of, a framework for what constitutes, a work-integrated, learning curriculum. What are the best practices, for doing this? Now at McEwan, that is what we are really trying to do to make sure that work integrated learning is an integral component, of our chemistry major. And I'm gonna show you in a couple of slides here, some of the insights, that we could take from how we've developed our work integrated learning curriculum as a component, of our chemistry major for the sole purpose, of making sure that the kind of HQP that we are training, is well adept, with the professional and the technical skills that are needed so that they can thrive in the very widely and wildly changing economic situation that we are in. And so very quickly, we've developed an integrated industry practicum, which we are calling the Chem 497. And this is a requirement for all chemistry majors, that they must take at least, a course in experiential learning, one of which, is this integrated industry practicum. Now, the requirement for it, and we've only done this, for the last 2 winters, so we got only sort of 16 students who've taken it in the last 2 years. And the requirement is that, the students are supposed to spend, at least, 90 hours over the 14 weeks of the internship. However, in practice, really most of the industries require them to commit, around 20 hours per week of their time, for them to work in the industry. So for the last 2 years, we've placed 16 students in different types of companies, including pharmaceutical developing companies, small biotech companies, also large government research institutes, and so on, as well as environmental analytics companies in Edmonton. So very quickly, the chronogram, on the chemistry practicum in our university, McEwan, so as academic mentor, normally they look for the internships, in the summer. And after that, around September, they invite the students to apply for the internships. Typically, the students who qualify for the internship, they must have taken a 300 level chemistry course. And then after that, in October, the applicants that are shortlisted and those that qualify, they are invited for a career workshop where they are trained on career management proficiencies such as, writing of resumes and so on. And then they are matched actually with the companies that have committed, to host the students. Now, the companies invite them, for interviews. Again, the shortlisted students, they are interviewed. And most of them, of course, get the internships, but of course, a few of them don't. So typically, out of, say, 8 students, out of 8 placements, we normally shortlist 10 students, and then the companies, select, the students that best qualify. And then after that, the students, after they are offered the internship, they meet with the organization, and that's around December, when they agree on the tasks that are gonna be taking place, and an agreement is actually signed, between the industry as well as the student and the university. And then after that, in January, that's when the internship starts. Now, before the students hand out for the internship, we take them through what we call the professional ethics seminar. In the professional ethics seminar, they are trained the chemical professional ethics, issues on equity, diversity, and inclusion, things like GLP, GMP as well, project management, issues on health and safety. So they do that, and after the seminar, they actually write an exam. So that one is mandatory for them to actually head out for their internships. So for the internships, when they start, we make sure that they actually, submit an internship proposal, which prompts the learners, to link the chemistry in the academia that they have learned with what they are actually doing in the industry. Another component of the internship is that they are required to actually write a monthly report that is evaluated by the industry mentor as well as the academic mentor. And the monthly report really is meant for them to self-reflect on the qualitative and quantitative, things that they are actually acquiring, or skill sets that they are acquiring, during their internship. And those are things that they actually include in their resume, in terms of the way they word them. And the students also meet, with the academic mentor bi-weekly, and the academic mentor takes them through, these self-reflections for them to extract, what they are really learning from the different tasks that they are working on in the industry. Around April, after writing 3 months, after their monthly reports, that's for January, February, and March, in April, the students, write an internship final paper, again, a sort of a reflective, paper linking academia, to some of the practices, that they acquired in the industry. Again, the whole idea is linking academia to industry and trying to extract, the skills that they are actually learning. And they also write, a personal testimonial, in that internship final paper, that indicates what they've actually learned again. And lastly, they also present, and in the presentation, we make sure they present, not only to the peers, but also to the industry hosts that are invited. And so it becomes a very essential sort of networking, event, where students can actually network, with different industry people. Now, in most cases, almost 90%, of the students after the winter internship, they end up actually getting a summer paid position, immediately after their internship, which is sort of what we often negotiate, with the industry, that after they train, the students in the internship, it's best, if they keep them, for the summer jobs. And again, we found 90%, success rate, in that. Now, as we are thinking about, the evaluation criteria, most of which I've talked about here, the framework here is guided, by authenticity, of the work integrated learning experience. So you make sure, the assessments and so on, and the work experience is completely authentic, meaning it very closely resembles, what a chemical professional would actually be doing in practice, so you make sure that they are really experiencing, what a typical chemical professional, would actually be experiencing. You also make sure, that the assessments and the evaluations constitute, a lot of self-reflection, because it's been well determined, that students learn best if they truly self-reflect the meaning, to what they are actually doing, and try to extract, the skill sets that they are gaining out of their experiences. In terms of the evaluation criteria, that's how we sort of structure it, and you can take a look at that later. Now, the work integrated learning has been very meaningful. Very quickly, the students' testimonials, excerpts from the students' testimonials, some of them say they've developed a lot of confidence. Some of them, they honed my skills in laboratory skills. Another student, mentioned that they improved, their time management, ability to be resilient and productive. Another student talked about the personal growth, that they experienced by virtue of, working or being exposed to these internships. Other examples, of excerpts are things like, students developed critical thinking skills and so on. And so in essence, it's been very, very well received, by the students, but also actually, by the industry people as well. So very quickly to summarize, some of the perspectives and future directions in chemistry. Now it's important to remember that, internships, should be supplemented, by other experiential learning opportunities such as students engage research, which we do a lot of, in McEwan. In fact, students are required to either take an internship or at least, take a research-based, discovery-based project for them to actually graduate with a chemistry major. And the whole idea, is for them to get, these experiential learning. Now, another important thing, that is very important to remember that, the work integrated learning or even the discovery based projects, should not be the only thing that we do, but all preparatory courses should really integrate, these professional skill sets as well. Because of course, the demand, for the experiential learning, internships and so on, is always gonna be much higher, than the supply. So for that reason, we should introduce professional skill sets, in preparatory courses as well. Another thing that I like to mention is a very extreme need, for interdisciplinary, or what I'm calling, cooperative learning across disciplines. For example, we try to do this, in McEwan, where we've got an industrial chemistry course, that intersects actually with a business course as well. This is where we get, students in Chem 410, which is an industrial chemistry course, develop a chemical technology, and then they collaborate with students in business for them to actually develop a business case for that chemical technology that they have developed. And again, we've seen, a lot of growth in terms of entrepreneurial thinking, which is what we are trying to develop, out of this intersectoral, type of learning. And this is very important, because most of the students, according to the ACEs, most of the chemistry students, up to 35% of them actually end up really not working, in a lab related environment, but instead, they work in management and so on. And so they need to think about or learn about these entrepreneurial, skills as well. And this one has been doing very, very well. So other things that I think is important, to remember that I think we should be doing for the future directions in chemistry. I think one of it, is collecting research data, on where our students go after they graduate. And in fact, doing what I'm calling a socioeconomic value analysis, so that we can evaluate, actually the value, of our chemistry, degree programs. And I believe, this can be a collaboration, say between professors and the CSC, which is often an accreditation body, which can help, in the collection of data, on where the students are going, how much money they are making, the related cost of investment, in a chemistry degree, and doing sort of a socioeconomic, value analysis, which has actually been done, in other types of programs, such as pharmacy as well. In fact, this is something that we hope to actually start doing in McEwan, and we'll be looking, to collaborate, with other chemists, in other universities as well. Another important future direction is the fact that we really need, to, infuse entrepreneurship, and enterprise and startups and so on in our universities. In fact, universities should really invest in what I'm calling interdisciplinary spaces, where incubations, could actually happen. And that's the basis, of this Chem 410, where we are trying, to create, that kind of thinking so that students can think themselves as entrepreneurs, rather than just job seekers. It's also very important, to think beyond, just physical labs, for internships, and experiential learning, in chemistry. And I think COVID, 19 taught us a lesson, and we had to really rethink, the idea, of doing chemistry, away from the lab. And I think there's a lot that can be said, in terms of technology based or technology facilitated or blended learning, that can be infused actually, in work integrated learning. And I should mention, actually, we did a bit of this because in the last 2 years, most of our work integrated learning was actually, interrupted by the COVID-19, and we had to rethink about how best, to go around it. We've got some ideas, we can share on that. And then finally, I think it's very important, for us to really embed equity, diversity, inclusion, in the chemistry curriculum. As we well know, EDI, or the lack of it, has impeded, innovation and so on. And I think it's very important, really, for us to actually collect, the disaggregate data on diversity composition of chemists, not only at the graduate those who are taking, at the graduate courses, but also graduate students and even professors, and so on, to see, how inclusive, we are being in terms of training chemists, and actually, how those chemists actually, progress in different industries, and how diversity really plays in, in the success, of those chemists. I believe there's a lack of disaggregate or good data, that gives information, about the EDI. And I should mention, that integrating EDI in the chemistry curriculum, is going to help us in terms of developing, cultural proficiency, which is really, really needed. And I think, the recently, constituted working group, on inclusion, diversity, and so on, within the CSC, can actually, help in the collection of data of how well we are actually doing as chemists. And I'm gonna leave it at that, and leave the open it for questions, when we get together.